28 premiers have made the jump to federal politics in the 111 years since Federation, but only 4 have done it since the Second World War. And former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr is the first from his state to join the Senate. He arises as Australia's new Foreign Minister at a time when power is shifting from west to east. And in his maiden speech today, Senator Carr said he sees Australia as a creative and activist middle power that defends its interests but sets out to be a model of good citizenship. The Foreign Minister joins us now. Welcome.
Good evening, Chris.
Has Australia struck the right balance between China and the United States?
Undoubtedly, yes. And both sides of politics can claim credit for that. It is a challenge for the first time in our history. The nation with which we have the major economic relationship is a nation with different values and a different form of government from our own. So one can't say there aren't challenges in this relationship, but ultimately we don't have to choose America or China.
But you seemed to suggest last year, after President Barack Obama's speech, that Australia had sided with a kind of a hostility, an American hostility towards China.
I thought then it was mistaken for us to enlist in the American campaign on China's currency. Our position is that the G20 is the best forum to have those discussions about currency. I supported at the time, back in November, you're referring to my blog, Now Ancient History.
That's not what you think?
I speak for Australia now.
You spoke the truth then and not speak the truth now?
No, I said then that I welcomed the rotating troop deployment in Northern Australia because it answers a deep-seated Australian anxiety that goes back over 100 years about the security of this continent and the security of its north in particular. But there should have been no hint in the interpretation. There certainly wasn't from the Australian government. No hint in the interpretation, the media interpretation, that was somehow an anti-Chinese gesture. And the interesting thing is, if you spool back and look at the Chinese response, it was a measured one.
It was measured, but they were upset.
I don't think so. I think going back and disinterring the comments,
Sure.
They were pretty muted. And it's no revelation, I'd put it this way, Chris, it's no revelation to Beijing that a rock-solid cornerstone of Australian security is that relationship we enjoy with the United States. This is in the Australian DNA.
Absolutely. Certainly the thing everyone talks about is getting the balance right, and that's the question.
Yeah.
And last year, former Prime Minister Paul Keating said that Australia had become wrapped up in an unmistakable anti-China stance after that speech, and you endorsed those comments.
Well, I speculated about that then. These days I speak for Australia. I'm not a freewheeling journalistic agent promoting a blog.
But your ideas will clearly push your opinions.
I was buoyant then, I'm buoyant today about Australia getting this balance. We don't have to choose, and remember this, Barack Obama, after speaking to the Chinese president in January 2011, said we welcome a greater role for China in the world. Don't forget that these two nations are not like Russia and America in the Cold War. They're economically interdependent. You could never have said that about the Soviet Union and the United States. And don't forget that there are other narratives in the Asia Pacific. It's not all this geostrategic competition between our ally, the United States, and our economic partner, China.
But you would agree that this is the big one, and you did say last year as well that there's no evidence that China has an aggressive expansionist or interventionist instincts. What about the South China Sea, where it's claimed most of it?
Well, we don't take a stand on the South China Sea. There are disputed territorial claims adhered to by several parties. That's for them to settle. When I spoke to the Indonesians last week, they were sanguine about the ASEAN or the East Asia Summit processes allowing a peaceful resolution. And they point to real progress in doing that in the last 2 years. We stand aside from that, but we're heartened by that by that message. The best guide on this, I think, is the writings of Henry Kissinger. If you read his book China, or read his recent article in Foreign Affairs, he says it should astonish no one that in China's re-emergence as a great power, not China's rise, because all Chinese know that they were once one of the world's superpowers, the country will acquire a military modernisation to sit with its economic strength.
Now, what about Tibet, though? You're clearly not a fan of the Dalai Lama. Are you going too far in trying to appease China?
No, I've been honoured to have met the Dalai Lama on 2 occasions. I just caution enthusiasts for the position of the Dalai Lama, that it doesn't help us coax the Chinese to be more attentive to human rights concerns if the demands for Tibetan autonomy become a demand for Tibetan independence. There's no country in the world that recognises that. When we recognised Beijing in 1972, we recognised sovereignty over Tibet, and so does every country. The second point I make is that it makes it harder to persuade the Chinese to be as respectful as we want to human rights in Tibet if advocates of the Dalai Lama's position talk about casting Tibetan sovereignty over parts of Yunnan and Sichuan province because there are Tibetan minorities there. But having said that, let me emphasise, I spoke as recently as Saturday night to Frances Adamson, our ambassador in Beijing, to have her request a visit to Tibet on behalf of the Australian government.
Was it a mistake that your first comment about the local region with any substance was to threaten sanctions against Papua New Guinea?
It was a mistake, and I've learned a lesson. My choice of language was wrong. I've only come from a reception where I had a very pleasant encounter with the High Commissioner of Papua New Guinea, and our conversation was as useful and as productive and as friendly as my conversation with their foreign minister, my counterpart, last week.
Now, I understand that you are considering perhaps re-looking at your position on Burma. Australia had lessened some of the sanctions earlier this year. Are you considering more?
Yeah, Cabinet has adopted a policy which allows us to peel back the sanctions that apply to Burma in response to substantive further progress to democratic norms, indeed to democracy in Burma. There has been big progress. I mean, to have 500 people released from prison, 500 political prisoners go free. I mean, that's the music of Beethoven's Fidelio. That's terrific news, to have the prison gates clang open and political prisoners walk through. That's free. That's heartening. To have free elections, these by-elections. But I'll say this. Any time we consider lifting a further sanction, we will want to know that the opposition in Burma approves of us doing it. In other words, that the next set of reforms, the next tranche of reforms, are serious.
All right, and just briefly, are you concerned with the taser death of the young Brazilian in Sydney? Of course, the police are looking into it. His family's deeply concerned, and so is the country.
It's an awful tragedy. At the reception we had just now, I saw the Brazilian ambassador, and I expressed my heartfelt condolences, asked him to pass them on to the parents. Any Australian mother or father thinking about their son or daughter travelling would view this news with real sympathy for the parents of this deceased boy.
Bob Carr, we'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.